we'll go ahead and get started this morning. Thank you for joining us. This is our fourth webinar in the series of 6 on how to have an awesome safety and health program and the foundations of what that safety and health, excellent safety and health program looks like. Of course, we've talked about what those pillars are, or maybe I call them the power-ups. These look like little batteries to me. Engagement and risk we've already covered. Today we're going to cover communication. Next month we'll go over inspections, and then the final month in June we'll wrap everything up with observations. And then depending on how people like this, maybe we'll do another set of webinars next year or maybe later this year, depending on what you'd like to do. So thank you again for attending this morning. Our goal at ARGO Safety and Health is to always help companies and people have excellent safety and health and environmental programs. We can help out in that aspect, in that area as well. So today we're going to be covering communication and how it's a cornerstone of world-class safety performance. So I'd like to start by doing a little case study or telling a story, I guess, and then see if there's some things that we can learn about communication and some things that can help us maybe improve our safety. So in 1983, Air Canada ordered and received some brand new Boeing 767s. The Boeing company introduced their 767s in September of 1982. And by 1983, big airlines like Air Canada and United and others had started purchasing and then flying this aircraft. And this aircraft was kind of unique in its start off in the fact that it only had 2 engines and was now rated to fly over water and long distances. And also because of all of the computerization that was going on and all of the PLCs and things that were created, they were able to eliminate the flight engineer or the second officer. So this was the first kind of commercial aircraft that flew with just a pilot and a first officer, a captain and a first officer. And so this incident that I'm going to tell you about with this Air Canada Boeing 767 happened in July of 1983. So the morning started out in Montreal, and the pilots ordered up the fuel. The airplane had been overnight in Montreal, and the new flight crew came on, and they got fueled up and they loaded up their passengers. They only had total of 69 people on board. That's including the crew and all of the passengers. I believe there were about 61 passengers. So the jet was a long ways from being full. I'm not sure. I don't remember how many passengers a 767 will carry, but it's between 180 and 250, somewhere in there. So it's a fairly good sized jet, can carry a lot of people. They made a short hop that afternoon over to Ottawa, where they also checked the fuel again. And I keep talking about the fuel. You'll see why this is important. And then they proceeded to take their flight towards Edmonton. And you can see the flight path that they were on. The dashed line is the intended flight path with the destination over in Edmonton. And obviously they left from Ottawa. The solid kind of orange line is where they were at. So when you get to this first map marker just before they made the turn, what happened there was they got an alarm in the cabin, in the cockpit up on the flight deck, that said that they had low fuel pressure pump in the left fuel in the left fuel system. And while they were troubleshooting that, the left engine basically went out. It stopped receiving fuel and it stopped. So at that point, they decided that they had better turn, and they made that first turn and they went towards Winnipeg. They were going to go to Winnipeg, where there was a service depot for the 767s and Air Canada, where they could get help. And so they started that direction. Where that second little map marker pin is they got the similar alarm on the right engine, low fuel pressure, and then right after that, the right engine quit. Now, in between those two things, they were already looking at their checklist, and they found a checklist, or they had been trained in the simulator, and they found the checklist for a single engine landing. But when the second engine quit, and now they're at 41,000 feet above sea level, or slightly lower than that because they had begun to descend, um, all of a sudden they had no engines. And looking through the checklist, there was not a checklist for no engine landing of this particular airplane. Of course, remember, this plane was less than a year old. When the engines both quit, they lost all of the electrical power, so they lost most of their instrumentation. They lost most of their hydraulic, and on those airplanes, there's what they call I can't remember what it's called. It's basically it's a turbine. It's a little prop that falls down below in the back of the airplane and into the slipstream that runs a little hydraulic pump that turns a generator. So they had minimal electrical. They could call on the radio, and they had minimal hydraulics that allowed them to kind of steer and control the plane. But they didn't have like enough hydraulic pressure to put the landing gear down. So when they lost the second engine, they declared an emergency. That's where that second kind of pin is. And as they were calculating their glide slope, and they're talking to the folks at air traffic control, they decided that they weren't going to have enough altitude to be able to coast or to glide all the way to Winnipeg. So they started looking for options. And that last place where they ended up right there is a place called Gimli. And at Gimli, that used to be a Royal Air Force base. And in fact, the first officer, when he had spent time in the military, had been stationed there, and so was familiar with the airfield and everything there. So they decided, because they were going to end up being about 10 miles short of the runway at Winnipeg, that they would go to Gimli. So for the next 17 minutes, they glided that airplane down from 41,000 feet-ish to where they could land at Gimli. Now, a couple of things at Gimli. Number one, it had been retired as an Air Force base and was now being used as a racetrack. And I believe this happened on Saturday, so there were races and families and barbecues and everything going on there, which provided some interesting challenges for them. And the other problem that they had was they had enough altitude that they would overshoot the runway, but they didn't have enough altitude that they could do a 360-degree turn to drop altitude. If they did that, then they would come up short of the runway. So fortunately, Bob, the pilot, was trained in flying gliders and had flown a lot of gliders, and he was actually able to perform this maneuver where they cross the controls. So the rudder in the back steers the airplane one way, and then he steers with the yoke on the front the other way, and it puts the airplane into kind of a slip. They call it slipping. And it uses the body of the airplane to help it to slow down. It increases the drag resistance from the air. And anyway, so he was able to slip the airplane, and they managed to land it on the runway at Gimli. And there were a couple of kids on the runway, and they saw the airplane coming in, and they were riding their bikes. The captain, in the little video that I watched about it, says that he could see the look of terror on their faces. So anyway, they gravity dropped the landing gear, and the back two landing gear on the airplane, as you can see in this picture, the landing gear came down, and gravity was able to support them. They got them into the lock. But the front landing gear, because they didn't have enough hydraulics, and it didn't drop into the slipstream enough for it to grab it, and gravity dropped that front landing gear, the front landing gear did not deploy fully. So when they landed, and fortunately, I guess, kind of a miracle that front landing gear didn't, because they didn't have enough braking. They applied the brakes as hard as they could, so much so that they blew out two of the tires on the rear of the airplane. But the thing that really helped the airplane to stop was that the friction of the front of the airplane grinding against the runway. So they come to a stop. They didn't hit anybody. Everybody is safe. They evacuated the aircraft. You can see in this picture some of those little rubber slides that are coming out off of the wings. One of the problems with having the front nose gear down on the airplane during this crash was that the back doors with their little slides on it, the slides did not reach all the way to the ground, but a few of the passengers actually used those. And the only injuries that came from this crash were the people that used those back doors to exit the aircraft. Anyway, they got everybody off the aircraft. Some folks that were there for the drag race brought some fire extinguishers over. There was a small fire that had started under the nose of the airplane. They got it taken out and they got it put out, and everybody was safe. And ultimately, Air Canada was able to repair this particular aircraft, and it flew until 2008 when it was retired. And it now sits at the boneyard there in Mojave, California, where they park a lot of old commercial airplanes. So anyway, great story, good ending. I mean, I was in the Air Force, and I always used to joke about, you know, a good landing was any landing that you could walk away from, and a great landing was anyone where you could fly the airplane again after you got completed. So by that definition, we had a good landing. We got everybody off. The airplane was ultimately repaired and everything else. But let's talk about what went wrong and what happened to these folks. So basically, they ran out of fuel. And by the way, the little QR code up in the left-hand corner of this slide, if you just scan that with your phone, it'll take you to a YouTube video about the Gimli glider incident. And it'll walk you through in a lot more detail than what I've had time or what I'm planning on, you know, sharing with you today. But as they investigated or began to investigate this incident, I mean, this was a brand new airplane. It was, you know, kind of the first one that was taking place. Everybody was excited about things. There were a couple of things that worked against them. Number one, the second officer wasn't there. And normally in the past, the second officer was the guy that did all the fuel calculations. And so that fell to the technician and to the pilots to figure out the fuel. One of the other things that was kind of unique about this, Canada was in this state of where they were switching from using imperial measurements, the old English system, into going to the metric system. And this was during the transition time in 1983 when they were making that change. So the captain and the fuel technician got together, or they worked it out, and they figured out how much fuel they needed, and that was dispensed. What ultimately happened was they ran out of fuel. In fact, when they got to Gimli and the investigators investigated, they were able to get a total of 17 gallons of fuel out of the fuel tanks. And just to give you a little bit of perspective or context on that, that would be like your car running out of gas and having about 5 tablespoons of gas left in the tank in comparison to the amount of fuel that jet needed. So the question then arose, well, how did we get to this point? Well, a couple of things. The first line underneath the fuel truck says volume. Fuel trucks dispense the fuel by volume. And in this case, this guy was dispensing fuel by gallon, and they had a conversion factor that would convert gallons to weight, right? So in the old days, prior to the metric system, they converted it to pounds, and in the new system, they converted it to kilograms, and there were 2 different conversion factors. Well, what ultimately happened was they used the wrong conversion factor. Airplanes need their fuel by weight because weight is an important calculation that they need in order to figure out how to fly it. So the first problem that they had is they had to convert from volume to weight. And then in the process of this, the fuel truck was selling things by gallons, and the airplane was taking things in kilograms. Okay, so they figured out, or what ended up happening in that third line down is the fuel truck delivered 22,300 pounds of fuel to the airplane, which turns out to be, because a kilogram is about 2 times the weight of a pound, they ended up with 10,115 kilograms, when in reality what they needed was 22,300 kilograms. So that's ultimately what happened. They ran the airplane out of gas because they had about half of the fuel. And if you go back to the map and look at the map, you can see they made it about half of the destination to where they were supposed to be going. So several opportunities to fix this problem. They took on fuel in both Montreal and in Ottawa. They ran the calculations and nobody caught the fact. Seems like it was kind of that perfect storm. So we can see how communication and using communication is something that can be very important. And probably if there was better communication about the volume and the weight and the imperial versus metric and everything, this accident could have been prevented. So today, in order to talk a little bit about communication, I'd like to do just a brief kind of review of a pretty standard communication model. because there are several things, we all know if you're involved in any kind of relationships in this life with other people, or whether it's at work or it's at home or just in the community, you can see that there's a lot of things that can go wrong and miscommunications happen. So in safety, one of the things that we want to make sure that whether we're doing an inspection or whether we're doing observations or whether we're dealing with a regulator of some sort or whether we're doing some sort of design in our plant, we want to make sure that communication or miscommunication, I should say, doesn't happen. We want to make sure that good, clear communication. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those things, but so that we're all on the same page, I'd like to start off with just the communication model. So all communication happens within context, and it requires a couple of different communicators. We've got communicator A and communicator B, and inside of that context, they have their kind of their own little microcosm of their rules and their norms. So if I were to say to this group, last week I had to go to HR because the pressure was declining, and I sat there and watched for a week as we worked through all of the problems to fix this pressure issue. That could confuse a bunch of people on this call, because in your context, you could be thinking that HR means Hudson Ranch, or that's what it really means, but you could have been thinking it meant human resources. So last week I went to an operation called Hudson Ranch where they were working on a well where the pressures were dropping, and I spent the week working with them. So you can see that if we get the context wrong to begin with, things like using acronyms and symbols that people don't normally use or understand can be difficult. When I was in the Air Force, we had our very own language that was all acronyms, and I could speak with other people in my unit or other people that did similar things that I did, and everybody understood exactly what we were talking about. When I would get off the phone with somebody, my wife would say, "What is it that you guys were talking about? You're going TDY and you're getting, you're getting your AFSC and all of these other kind of acronyms." So one of the things that you want to make sure is that we all understand the context that we're in. And then we have to remember that people view the world differently depending upon where you were raised, what kind of family construct you had. All of those things fall into that context piece. So one place that we can have possible problems is not understanding the context. Okay. Second piece of the communication model is a message. So messages, have to be encoded. That's you're changing your thought into some sort of way that we can transmit that message. So there's verbal and nonverbal. One time I had this group of folks that were helping out with safety and health, and one of the guys went to his supervisor and said, "Hey, I'd like to go do some observations for the last hour today." And the supervisor crosses his arms, gives a big sigh, looks at his watch and says, "Okay, if you have to." Now, I would ask, what do you think that supervisor really communicated? His words, his verbal communication said, "Yes, you can go do observations." But his nonverbal communication said, "No, I don't want you to go and do that." So there's verbal and nonverbal, there's vocal and non-vocal, and there's all kind of stuff about messages. Written text counts as a verbal kind of communication and things like that. So what happens with this is the idea forms in my head if I'm communicator A, and I view that all through my rules and my norms, then I encode it into some sort of format that you can read, whether I'm speaking or I'm showing body language, maybe I'm sending an email. Those kind of things are called, and I forgot to put those on. I had a label at one point where they were called channels. Um, a channel is a text, it could be an email, it could be a phone call, it could be an in-person visit, some sort of way that message could be a sign that's written, something out there that converts that message that's in your head into an encoded form that somebody else can take a look at it. And so as you see underneath the bottom of our communicators there, we've got send, receive, respond, and the thing that they have to do in order to do the send and receive is decode. They have to be decoded. Hang on, we got a couple of folks that showed up in the lobby. Okay, so in order for that to happen, then that goes through your rules and your norm if you're a communicator B, and then hopefully you get some sort of understanding of the idea that started in communicator A. Communicator A starts with a message, encodes it, sends it through some sort of channel, whether it's verbal, nonverbal, text, email, sign, whatever it might be. Then it lands on the ears or in the brain of communicator B, who then decodes that based on what their rules and their norms are. And so if we were in a classroom, a lot of times I have this old exercise where I have a picture of both a dog and a cat. And I'll have one person from the class come up and describe the cat, 4 legs, furry, has a tail, is wearing a collar, light brown in color or whatever, and then I have the rest of the people in the room draw a picture of what it is that they're drawing. It's amazing the number of people that when a cat is described to them, they end up describing a dog. And a lot of that has to do with if you're a dog owner, that's what you see or that's what you perceive. Anyway, the next thing that happens in our communication model is this concept of noise. So noise is something that can get in the way of any message in any channel. You think about if you've had a cell phone, since we converted over to digital cell phones several years ago, every now and then you'll have a piece where you'll just miss some of the digital communication and you'll get every other letter or every other word, and it becomes very difficult. That's an example of external noise, right? Or in some cases, it could be that you're outside in a noisy area, literally noise, or it could be there's some sort of physical problem, like maybe you have poor hearing or your hearing aids aren't working or something like that. So noise are things that can get in front of and can mess up that message, make it difficult to understand, make it difficult to decode. And so the only way that we get through that is to make sure that we're communicating and make sure that the right messages have been sent, is if we use that feedback loop. So one of the things that I always like to do, especially with my own kids, I don't know that I would do this with another adult because I don't want to seem insulting, but a lot of times I'll give instructions to my kids and I'll say, please tell me again what I just told you. That way I can check what it is that they're doing. And there are systems that get built, our airplane friends, our airplane pilots, they always repeat back. I know that there's positive communication models that happen around railroads and working in the plant, especially if you're working on critical work, where the person that's receiving the message then repeats back over the radio or back to the person giving the instructions exactly what was said so that we can ensure it. That's that feedback loop. And you don't have to be rude or condescending with it. You can ask people, what is it that I just told you? Or can you tell me in your own words? And if you're a good communicator, maybe you're the person that's receiving the message, one of the things that you could use as a strategy when somebody gives you some instructions or communicates some material to you, you can always say things like, let me make sure I understand you. Here's what I think you just told me. And then you repeat it back to them. And that's a skill that you can develop in order to make sure that we're not losing our messages in the context, in the noise, in all of the other things that have to go through that process of encoding and decoding. Okay, so before we move on, that is kind of the communication model. Does anybody have any questions or comments that they would like to make about how communication works? All right, because I knew that you guys probably wouldn't ask many questions today. After that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce to you a good friend of mine named Kiki Mulliner. Kiki has been around for a little while. She's very young and has done lots of great work. She's got a master's degree in educational psychology and a PhD. I think that was from NYU, wasn't it, Kiki? NYU in adult learning and organizational leadership.
It's from Columbia.
Oh, from Columbia. So, awesome. Glad that we've got some important education there. Kiki has worked many, many years in helping people understand how adults learn and how we can help organizations achieve success. And she's also a very, very good communicator. And in both of her degrees, she spent a significant amount of time on communication. So I've asked her to come and be a guest speaker today and share a few things with us. I've also worked with Kiki in the past in developing health and safety programs that really work well. And so I've asked her to come and share some of her thoughts today about communication and how communication really helps us build culture and make a great place to work and a safe place to work. So Kiki, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Brian. So Brian has talked to you about communication, how it works, what a model is. We saw a situation where things sort of went awry, sideways, for lack of communication. And we know that communication is very important when it comes to safety in our organizations. But one of the things that we also know is that the impact of relationships on safety is a well-documented phenomenon. So supervisors and teams with good relationships with each other have better safety records and fewer incidents. And alternatively, poor relationships in the workplace cause teams not to be fully engaged with safety. Why do you think this is so? I'm going to make you guys talk. Why do we have fewer incidents when we have good relationships? Go ahead.
Del. Go ahead,
Thank
Del.
I think one of the reasons is with good communication, you build relationships where people care about each other. And so you've got folks looking out for each other and maybe seeing dangers that one person wouldn't see and helps prevent an injury.
Absolutely. Any other ideas? I don't know what other ideas there could be, because that was it, dead on. Yes, we care about each other when we have good relationships and good communication. Leaders and coworkers who demonstrate genuine interest and concern for others are respected and appreciated, and they motivate all of them around, all the people around them, to work safely. What do you think is the foundation of good relationships, especially around safety? What is the foundation, the underpinning thing that makes relationships good or not so good?
Looks like Hattie's typing in the text, Kiki.
Oh,
She said reciprocation, sharing, and information.
absolutely. Thank you very much. That's what it is. It's the communication that creates these positive relationships. So that first element is solid communication, and there are 4 parts of solid communication that feed into this positive relationship that raises our safety in the places that we work. The first one is setting clear clear expectations. What does it mean to set clear expectations? It's not as simple as it appears to be. What are the components of setting clear expectations in the workplace or at home?
Well, I think usually that means you need a clearly defined goal. That's the most important thing to setting up boundaries is, what can we work towards together? What goal can we achieve?
So you have an end in mind,
Right.
before that's mutual. It's going to benefit both of you. That's great. That's something I hadn't thought of, but it takes things kind of above and beyond. You identify a common goal that you're working towards. What else is involved with setting clear expectations?
Kiki, I think that just making sure that you're in the right context. I mean, again, in the example that we used earlier today, one guy was dealing with pounds and gallons, and another guy was dealing with kilograms and liters. And that's a great opportunity for us not to, even though we were both, I mean, everybody wanted this airplane to take off and land successfully, but that set us up. So you got to make sure you got your context right.
Absolutely. Okay, Brian, will you bring up the next slide? Okay, one of the things that is absolutely essential when you're looking at this model, it becomes very apparent, is this feedback loop that Brian spoke about. Okay, so this is understanding when you're setting expectations with folks, making sure check in and see what did they understand. I had clear expectations, I think, because I've identified common goals. We all know what the end in mind is. And these are the expectations that I have of how we're going to get there. Now, if that isn't understood by the person you're communicating to, what could happen? They go off this way, you go off that way, and the expectation isn't met. And one of the things that Brian identified is the biggest challenge with this setting of clear expectations in relationship building, and that is, how do you check that people have understood you without saying, now tell me back what I told you? What are some tools you think you could use to make that a little bit more smooth?
Because something that I do is I repeat basically what I want to be done and who's going to do it, and then just ask the question, is that your understanding also? You know, so I'm not putting so much the burden on them or challenging their intellect.
Great, that's fabulous. A very graceful way of doing it. And then the other thing you can say is just tell me what you heard. You know, what did you hear? Let's just check in and make sure that those expectations are clear. And we've seen many, many times in safety as well as in simpler things, even things that we do with our children, we miscommunicate and miss on this setting expectations, and it can be, in safety, it's got very grave consequences. So it's really important that we make sure that we're all on the same page before folks set out to meet those expectations. Okay, the next important element of creating great relationships is, and change slide, is active listening. So Rachel, I'm going to pick on you. What does that mean to you? What does active listening mean? Okay, anybody. Rachel may not be with us anymore. Nikki, Val.
Fabiana's got something.
Okay, great.
John.
Thanks. I can't. Yeah.
Active listening for me is listening without adding anything.
Oh, perfect. Perfect. What does it mean to others? What are some other components of active listening?
Part of active listening is just repeating what's been said, making sure they understand that you've received the message.
Beautiful. What else? Lacey? Listen to comprehend. Absolutely. So the way I put that is listening to understand. Same word as comprehend. So rather than moving on to what you want to say, you do a check-in and make sure that you've understood correctly. You know, this is what I heard you say again. You know, so those are all great. So active listening is very important. Asking clarifying questions, yes. Yes, making absolutely sure that you have understood what they're saying before you move on to something else. And some tools you can use are things like, is that all? Clarifying questions. You know, just make sure that you've understood, and it's okay if you get it wrong. That's one of the things that sometimes people, you know, feel at first when they're doing this active listening, that they didn't get it right. But it's perfectly fine to not get it right. just make sure you ask those clarifying questions or restate what you heard so that you have a chance to clarify things at the get-go. Okay, and then the third component of relationship building is ask questions to understand, and this is a little bit different than active listening, to understand problems and issues. How is this different than listening to understand? When, let's say you have gone out and you see someone doing something that's not safe. In that context, we want you to ask questions to understand. How is that different than seeking to understand what someone's just said? And why is it important?
One of the big things for me is going out and doing observations like that is asking them questions to gain what they understand the process or the procedure actually is, what they have been trained to and what they're actually executing in the field.
Absolutely, 100% dead on. If before you correct somebody, you hear what their understanding is, what they're doing, what they think they're doing, what the whys are for what they're doing, then when it comes time for you to either correct or have a conversation with them, you've understood what their understanding was. And that's very important to positive relationship building. There's always one where it meets the eyes, and you want to understand what their thought process was underpinning the actions, and you know, not just so you understand, but also so that they feel understood. And that's important in the relationship building arena. And then the final component to positive relationship building is to follow through on commitments. Why is this so important?
Well, if you don't follow through on your commitments, you're not trusted.
Exactly. Anyone have any other thoughts? I thought I heard two. So following through on your commitment, I used to have and still have an understanding with my children. But when they were growing up, one of the things we talked about all the time was is your word. If you give me your word about something, then I need to be able to trust it. Because your word ultimately is the only thing that you have. And if I can't trust that you are giving me in essence, with my kids, it was a promise. And you break your word, then I'm not going to trust you. If you keep your word, then I'm going to trust you. And that held throughout the kids' childhood. They always told me the truth, and that I was lucky. It was very it was very impactful to our relationship. But if you don't keep your word, when we've talked about setting clear expectations, active listening, asking questions to understand, and building relationships, if you break your word, what happens to your relationship?
They fall apart. And I would just add, Kiki, that in doing health and safety, sometimes you might have to ask people to do things that are hard. Sometimes it's harder to do things the safe way. And if they don't trust what it is that you're asking them to do, then they're not going to do it, which could then expose them to an injury.
Right. So the things that I have on my list is all the rest of the things you do to build relationships rely on trust, which, as we said, if that's broken, things don't go forward. But when we're talking about safety, it's not just trust and the relationship is, you know, something that's important. It's vital for everybody's safety and survival. And just like communication, trust is a two-way street. And when we're in a safety leadership position, that trust is something that is vital, because, as Brian said, we're asking people to do really hard things. And when we break our word, all bets are off. What does keeping your commitment look like in each of your locations? We won't go through everyone, but in a couple of your locations. What does that look like, keeping your commitment in the safety arena, or even in your family? What does it mean to keep your commitment? Literally. Like if someone comes to you with a safety issue, what do you have to commit to do?
In my city, folks will bring safety concerns to me, and they don't always have the resources or the I don't know, political clout to address it. And so I commit, to do something about it, to hear their concerns and then address it, and then circle back with them on what the ultimate outcome was, just to show them like, hey, their opinion and observations are valuable, and safety really is a priority.
Absolutely, 100%. And then someone put in the chat, document it, which is also important. But you have to not only document it, you do have to document it, but document how you fixed it for the record. That safety relationship that we're working so hard to build is really, really reliant on that keeping of your commitment. So they know your word is good. They're taking a risk by telling you these things, and you have to 100% make the commitment to do that. If we use clear communication to build great relationships, we'll see the impact on safety at each of our operations. That's what I've got, Brian.
All right. Well, Kiki, thank you. I appreciate you taking your time to stop by today. As I thought about how I wanted to structure these webinars at the end of last year, and we had this idea of providing these things, we looked at the 5 things that would really help companies make great safety performance, regardless of where your current performance stands, whether you're already doing well or if you want to improve, or whether you're having some struggles. And there's some real thought that went into adding communication right here in the center of this, because without the communication, you don't get engagement from your team and from your employees. It's hard to identify and manage risk if people won't talk to you and tell you about what they see. It's impossible for one safety person or even a team of 5 or 6 safety people to see all of the risks that take place in day-to-day work. Communication is so essential and helps us to drive and adopt that culture. And then next month and the month after, when we start talking about inspections and observations, we're going to talk about some strategies on how to make those things happen, and then how to communicate in order to get good results out of those things. And so if you want my philosophy on things that any organization can do in order to improve their safety performance, you need to look at these 5 areas: engagement, risk, communicating, building those relationships, and then doing good and proper inspections for conditions, and then making sure that we're connecting to that front line through our observation process. So we have just a minute or 2 left. If there's anybody that would like to ask any questions of either myself or Kiki, or pose something to the group, we're certainly open to doing that. We appreciate you guys spending your time with us this afternoon this morning and this afternoon. Does anybody have any comments or questions that they would like to bring up for the whole group? Obviously, you can put them in the chat, and you can reach out to the chat. You'll get an email from me sometime in the next couple of weeks when we have this all published. You can go out to our website, argoshe.com, and you can download and watch the video of this again, or feel free to use it if it's something that works within your organization that you would like to use. Obviously, I've got some QR codes here. They'll be in the video. They'll be on the PowerPoint presentations. My favorite one is the bottom left one, Hear a Duck Quack. Just scan that thing in my phone. You're going to go to a web page where you can hear a duck quack. Otherwise, you can either look for more free webinars. The last 2 that we've got, you can sign up for them with that center QR code. And if you've got questions or things that you'd like to work with ARGO to help improve your safety program at your location or with your team and with your people, by all means, go to our webpage. You can fill out a contact form. We'll get back to you and schedule some time that we can spend together working with you. Our passion is to help people have safest places to work. We're so focused and excited about that. We're really, it's just something that means the world to us and so important. So with that, I'll wrap up and say again, thank you again today for your time. If you'd like to reach out, by all means, you know how to get in touch with me. And we hope that everybody has a great month until we get together again in May to go over inspections. Have a great day.